Life. Life is depressing. Just getting up every single day to do the same menial tasks over and over and over again until one day you can just finally retire, only to realize you have nothing to do with your life. So you just waste away in a retirement home, waiting for the Grim Reaper to finally knock on death's door. So we as humans like to distract ourselves with things that make us happy. One of those things being video games. And let me tell you, I've played plenty of those over the years. But one that I still vividly remember to this day is Breath of Fire 2. It may not be the newest game out there, the most well written, but damn it's honest. And I just want to appreciate the beauty that this game beholds. Here's why Breath of Fire 2 gives me life. Breath of Fire 2 is the very definition of an RPG. It's like someone took all the tropes of 90s RPGs and just meshed them all together to create one game. It has an abundant amount of random encounters, a cryptic translation, completely missable mechanics. Hell, it even has multiple endings. Classic 90s RPG right there. And depending on who you are, this may be a bad thing, but I myself consider the 90s to be the golden age of RPGs, so this is obviously going to affect the way I view this game. It just has so much going for it. For one, the art is absolutely stunning. The colors and environments have me in awe throughout my entire playthrough. I also love the character portraits. Sometimes I just stare at them and just appreciate how well they were made. Something the Game Boy Advance version of this game just absolutely butchers. Like, what are these? The UI was also a nice surprise. Coming from the first game, it was really cool to see how much they improved the game's interface. Again, something that the Game Boy Advance version of this game fucked up. In fact, from what I've seen, that version of the game just sucks in general, at least visually. The only upside I can think of is that it allows you to run, which is a luxury I was willing to give up just to see the game in its original glory. And I think the sacrifice was truly worth it, because the visuals really help flesh out the world presented to you. Everything just feels so lively, especially compared to most 90s RPGs. It's almost fairy tale-like. I was fully immersed in the world, which was not something I'm usually into in most games. I actually feel inclined to explore the world and not just go to the same locations I'm forced to go to progress the story, unlike in some games. Final Fantasy V. There's just so much personality here, and the game actively goes out of its way to show you that. Like, for example, you start the beginning of the game as a kid version of Ryu, and during this you'll encounter a battle. You'll be then greeted with a small Ryu flailing his arms while attacking the enemy in front of him. This is like the only time you'll ever see this battle sprite, like ever. Another example is Bo's overworld sprite being him hopping around in the trash can when he's sneaking around. This also only happens once, but it makes the game feel so much more cinematic. Well, as cinematic as an SNES game can be, but this game does a really good job with that. You don't often see animated, detailed cutscenes like that in your Final Fantasies. I don't know why I'm dissing Final Fantasy so much in this video. Those are like some of my favorite RPGs ever. The reason for all these Final Fantasy comparisons though, is that Breath of Fire just feels so ahead of its time in comparison to those. And they're all great games, but Breath of Fire just has something different about it that makes it feel more modern in a way, and it really surprised me. It feels simultaneously ahead of its time, but also of its time. And when I say of its time, I certainly mean of its time. Let's talk about that. I'm just gonna say it now. The combat is basic, but I kinda love it for that. It's just your standard turn-based RPG battle system, you know, typical for its era. But something about it is just so compelling to me, whether it be the visuals and the battle animations, or just its simplicity compared to what we have today. It got to the point where I would just purposely grind just because I like battling so much. The battles just felt so fluid. A big problem with a lot of older RPGs that I see is that it doesn't really feel like I'm in full control of my party, you know? But the way everything is choreographed in this game, it just makes it feel like I'm in full control. It makes the battles just feel so alive, and I really love it for that. Another thing that I really like about this game is that each character has their own unique attributes. It's not mild changes either. Some are cat, others are absolute dog shit. For example, Nina is more of a healer and has a special command which regenerates AP, while Kat is more of a fighter and isn't really great for spellcasting, and Spar is really good at being useless. Each character has a pretty basic role in battle, which helps keep things simple. Personally, I went with Ryu, Kat, Stan, and Rand, as I really like being able to dish out damage, while also being able to get a good amount of hits in too. But some playstyles are harder than others, and this game doesn't really reward switching up, which, in my opinion, isn't really a good thing for an RPG, especially when there are so many characters and playstyles to pick from. It's not all bad though. One thing I can certainly say is I really like the fusion mechanic, which I should probably explain right now. Around the last third of the game, you're basically just given the option to fuse certain party members with others. This presents you with so many opportunities to just switch things up, and it actively encourages you to try out new things. Let me say, most of these fusions are extremely overpowered, especially for grinding. My favorites being Shin, Kat's double fusion, and Sten's fire fusion. Sten absolutely carried me through the last part of the game. I have no idea what I'd do without him. Spar's fusion is also okay. I mean, I guess. Nobody needs to know that though. This is a Spar free channel. I hate Spar with every fiber of my being. But speaking about things that I hate, one thing I really don't like about the system is that it requires you to collect these ladies called shaman. Now, some are relatively easy to get and basically just impossible to miss if you're playing through the game normally, while others want you to solve the mystery of Cicada 3301 just for you to access them. To add icing on the shit cake, some of them, if you don't get them at a certain time, they're just outright locked away for the rest of the game, and you can't go back to get it. Please, for the love of God, just play this game with a guide. It's not worth the trouble. But, speaking of God, let's go on to the story. If you haven't played this game, you wouldn't get that segue that I just did right there. That was actually really clever. You know, just appreciate that for a moment. Breath of Fire 2 has a lot to say about religion, and it doesn't really have that much nice to say. The game specifically has major beef with Christianity, which I don't really want to get into much, cause frankly, I just find it really boring, even though I do find the messages and themes in the game to be pretty well conveyed here. The game just shows how this new religion is moving in and kind of imposing on the past culture that was there before in the land, and they're just disregarding old traditions and demanding you worship this new thing. The game doesn't do this with much subtlety, but I guess it gets its message across, so it's fine. You can kinda go the entire game just ignoring all this and still come out knowing the story and stuff. This is kinda like a side piece, I guess. I'd say takes more of a backseat in the overall narrative of the story. Enough with the boring talk though. Let's get onto the part of the story that I actually care about. Story is important in an RPG. Most people always come for the story, me included, and while I was expecting a story kinda small in scope, kinda like the last game, let me just say I was blown away by how this game's story unfolded. From the very opening scene, you can already tell this game is going to be different from every other SNES RPG. The very first thing you see is the Eye of a Dragon slowly opening, speaking cryptically towards you. You're subsequently thrown into this world where you don't know who or where you are. Right off the bat, this game tells you it's going to be different, and it wants you to know that. I feel like a lot of games nowadays try too hard to be like movies. It really makes me cringe sometimes. So it's nice to just go back and look at the storytelling of days long behind us to enjoy something more down to earth. I was able to grow to love these characters and their relationships over the course of the game. From Kat and Ryu's somewhat romantic relationship, to Bo and Ryu's friendship with each other. I genuinely grew attached to these characters, even with the limitations of the SNES. I will admit though, some characters certainly get more development than others. Spar hardly gets any development after you meet them, but I honestly think that's a good thing, cause you know, fuck Spar. And Sten as well as Jean don't get too much attention after their time in the spotlight. Although I gotta admit, both of their respective arcs were really intriguing and helped me like these characters much more than I already did. My main point though is the story along with the visuals and world all just feel so fleshed out. Characters die in this game. They grow together, they fight together, they love and they hate together. It's so remarkable. That sounded corny as hell, but that's what this game does to you. It really makes you care about everything in this world. But before you think I'm getting too sappy on this game, I want to discuss the things that I don't like about it. A common thing I heard about this game is that it's one of the hardest SNES RPGs. I don't know what game they were playing because I found this game to be pretty easy. I don't even think I died once. For reference, I died more in Final Fantasy V than I did this game. Supposedly one of the hardest RPGs on the system. So yeah, I really doubt that claim, but I mean, to each their own I guess. Maybe I'm just a god at RPGs or something. I don't know. I mean, I grinded for like 10 hours, so I mean, that's probably why. But I guess I can see how somebody newer to RPGs could struggle with this. One thing I can say I agree with though, is that this game's extremely cryptic. It just doesn't tell you where to go or what to do at all. I know a lot of people say the story's watered down by the translation, which I can't really confirm or deny, since I only played the official translation and nothing else. But in terms of like gameplay and telling you what to do, it's just terrible at it. Like, you basically need a guide just to know what to do next. It's really not good at telling you where to go. Also, there's just Spar, whose entire presence just makes this game worse. But if I'm being honest, I really don't have that much bad to say about this game. There are still things like the high encounter rate, the slow walk speed, the unbalanced characters, and yeah, those things do add up. But I can forgive this game for all the things it simply does right. Before the video ends, there's still one thing I want to do though, and that's compare Breath of Fire 1 to Breath of Fire 2. Breath of Fire 1 is decent, but it honestly feels like a beta version of 2. I know it's because it came first, but I really just can't shake that feeling. They're so similar, but also so different at the same time. From the enemies to the characters, even the angle at which the battle camera is facing are similar. The only difference being Breath of Fire 2 just feels more polished and perfected in every other way, while 1 just felt more like a foundation than anything. The world in 2 just feels so much more fleshed out, like I already mentioned earlier, whereas 1 kind of feels like a textbook fantasy world. It doesn't really feel like a world that's lived in, more of just an empty wasteland with the occasional town or dungeon. The battle angle in 1 was also a really cool thing to me when I first played it, and I still love it. Not a lot of pixel art RPGs, especially at the time, had that angle when you were in a battle. It feels so much more cinematic. I know I keep calling these games cinematic, but really, Breath of Fire, just the series in general, just does all of that so well. It kind of feels like you're playing a movie or an old book. And with 2, they outdid that in every single way. The angle only changed slightly, but it still really kept that charm. And I really do think that the angle and just battles in general improved so much as the games went on. Another thing is that in battles, the enemies just feel so much more well integrated into the battle screen. In 2, they just feel fully integrated into the environment that you're fighting them in, with full-on animations, shadows, ripples in the water if they're near like a lake or the ocean. I just feel like I'm fighting some actual wild creature while I'm in the wilderness. I know I'm really talking up Breath of Fire 2, but there is one thing that I think 1 does better, and that's dragons. Dragons are cool, and Breath of Fire has a lot of them. I mean, it's literally in the name. I know it doesn't say dragons, but like Breath of Fire, you know, you can make the correlation there. And I really care how my dragons are done in these games, and I just think 1 does it better. In 1, when you turn into a dragon, Ryu just feels like an unstoppable force. He's just so overpowered and it's really fun to use. I find myself just using this mechanic every single battle because I just like destroying my enemies. And this mechanic makes the final boss a piece of cake, but it's just so satisfying that I don't even care. And honestly, I much prefer it over 2. So, if you don't know, in 2, the whole party turns into a dragon and basically just does one big attack on whatever enemies are on the screen. And I really like this one too, and the animation's absolutely fantastic, but it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't have the same force behind it, you know? It's just more of like a special attack than an actual like thing you can use. And don't get me wrong, I love both, but I just think Breath of Fire 1 does the dragon mechanic way better. But in retrospect, I really don't have much to say about Breath of Fire 1. It's just your really basic by-the-books fantasy RPG. Which, don't get me wrong, I still love that game to death, even though I talk bad about it sometimes. And I mean, it was my first RPG, so I'm definitely going to be fond of it. But in the grand scheme of things, it pales in comparison to other games on the system. Hell, it pales in comparison to its sequel, which came out just a year later. Overall though, I'd give 1 about a 7 out of 10, and 2 a 9.5 out of 10. Although no matter what score I give them, they both have a special place in my heart. Okay, so that sounded disgustingly sappy, so I think it's time to end the video about now. It's been over a year since I beat this game, and my life has changed drastically since then, almost unrecognizably to when I first played this game. But even then, I still go back to it. I still listen to the soundtrack. I'm still impressed by its art and animations. I still love its characters. And no matter how many games I play, I truly believe nothing will surpass my sheer and utter enjoyment of this game. Because Breath of Fire 2 is not only a masterpiece, but it's my favorite game of all time. And it truly deserves every single piece of praise it ever got. Oh yeah, by the way, Spar sucks.